We're now recording. Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Páraic Finnerty, and I just want to welcome you to this session, Emily Dickinson, Taylor Swift, Aesthetic Resonances and Creative Encounters. I'd like to start off by thanking Li-hsin for organizing this brilliant session and for asking me to host. I don't know a lot about Taylor Swift, so I've invited one of my friends and colleagues, Helen Ringrow, from the University of Portsmouth, who has worked who's on Taylor Swift, has done linguistic and stylistic approaches to her lyrics. So I'm really delighted to have Helen as my co-host. So thank you, Helen. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to introduce the speakers and the talks, and then Helen is going to mainly do the Q&A about Swift and Dickinson. So I hope that's okay. So today's panelists are Saskia and Bultman, whose talk is Rereading Dickinson's Poetry and with Taylor Swift. Elizabeth Dinneny, and the title of her talk is Imagining Celebrity with Dickinson and Swift. Li-hsin's talk is Dickinson and Swift's Conversation with Wordsworth. Jeannette Schollaert is the title is Cottagecore, which is an interesting word. Aesthetics, Dickinson and Swift. Kimberly Southwick-Thompson's talk is Time, Travel, Dickinson, Plath and Swift. And Tien's talk is Revisiting Dickinson's and Swift's Corresponding Tropes of Literary Engagement. So I will hand over to the first speaker, Saskia.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm just going to share my screen so I can share the slides with you. Can everybody see the slides properly?
Yes.
Should I maximize them, or is this okay?
It's okay, but do you want
to maximize them?
Yeah, maximize.
Oh, that looks
okay.
better, thanks.
Is this better? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
well, if you'll do them from the begin slideshow so that we don't have that sidebar.
Oh, hang on. I think it's sorry.
Also at the bottom where there's a slideshow sign at the bottom left, right, if you could see it, you could also use that button.
It's close to the volume sign or the display.
Oh, I think I have a sort of a different kind of screen. Let's see. Is this better?
Yeah, that button, yes. If you click on it, that one.
Then it seems to do this. Okay. Maybe. Let's see. Does this help? Okay. Is this better?
It looks the same
to me. It's the same, but I mean, it's fine.
It's okay. We can enlarge your PowerPoint on our own screens on our own if we need that. So it's okay.
Well, sorry, my slide is filling the whole screen. I'm not sure.
Okay.
If this is a different kind of view.
It might have had to be. You might have to hit present or show and then share.
Oh, right.
Having just done this.
Okay, now it's showing us full screen for me. I'm not sure if I can get it any different than this.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Okay. My apologies. Online meetings.
Mm.
So good afternoon, everybody, or morning, evening, wherever you are. And many thanks to Li-hsin for organising this panel. So today I'd like to talk about connections that fans have made in the online world between Emily Dickinson and Taylor Swift and how we may interpret these reading practices. As you all probably know, Swift fans started making Dickinson-Swift connections in 2020 when the Taylor Swift album Evermore was released. And this album featured the song Ivy, which was widely interpreted as being about Emily Dickinson and her relationship with Susan Gilbert Dickinson. And we can't fully understand this connection without understanding the online TikTok culture around Emily Dickinson as it took shape from around 2019 onwards, following the release of the Apple TV show Dickinson, which is a fictionalized television series about the life of Emily Dickinson, which gives a prominent role to the romantic relationship between Emily and Sue, which it posits as fact. Fans of the show created the EmmySue hashtag, making TikTok videos celebrating the relationship between Emily and Sue. And besides this, TikTok became filled with videos in which the real-life poet Dickinson is claimed as an LGBT poet, and in which, notably, Dickinson scholars are criticised for overlooking this aspect of the poet's life. Here on this slide, you can see a still from such a TikTok video. And the gist of such videos is, in Dickinson's letters, it's plainly obvious that there was a romantic or sexual relationship between the two women. However, scholars have obtusely overlooked and perhaps also purposely sanitized the LGBT content of Dickinson's life, claiming that the relationship between the two was nothing more than friendship.
Saskia, I think your PowerPoint is not moving.
No?
Yeah, we can still see the first page.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. On my screen, it is moving.
Oh.
Let's try again. Maybe in
I think you have it on like present mode, so you have like you're seeing like the other screen, and we're seeing like the screen that the presenter is supposed to see. Yeah.
Okay. Is this? Can you see moving slides now?
You are not sharing your screen yet, so do you want to share it? Okay.
When you share, you should be able to select content as opposed to your entire
oh yeah,
desktop.
I did just do that window and then share the PowerPoint. How about now?
Yes, we can see different pages now. Brilliant.
Okay. So here's the still from the TikTok video.
You'll have to scroll between them though as you get to the next one.
Okay. So in part, these EmmySue Dickinson Swift connections put forward by the Swift fans, such as the song Ivy being about Emily and Sue, fit in with the idea that goes back quite a long way that Swift herself is secretly LGBT and that it's only a matter of time before she comes out. This reading of Swift, which is adhered to by the so-called gay law subset of Swift fans, has been characterized by Dutch Swift scholar Annelot Prins as fans engaging in what literary theorist Yves Kosofsky-Sedgwick has described as reparative reading. In this case, not critically dismantling literary works for evidence of their alignment with systems of oppression, but finding queer-related content in Swift's lyrics that may or may not be there, but which can be viewed nonetheless as a joyful and emancipatory practice. There is thus a lively online Emily Dickinson fan culture and a lively online Taylor Swift fan culture, both of which intersect. And an example of how the two intertwine can be seen in the TikTok video shown here. In the video, TikTok user DJ Crocs draws a connection between the announced release date of Swift's then latest album, The Tortured Poets Department, on April 19th, or 419, and what they term Poem 419, or the Dickinson poem We Grow Accustomed to the Dark, which is numbered 419 in the Johnson edition of the poems. Based in the idea that Dickinson was an LGBT poet who wanted to come out but couldn't because of societal conventions, DJ Crocs speculates that the Tortured Poets Department might be Swift's coming out album, and, through a detailed close reading of the poem, speculates on 2 possible readings, asking, is Swift going to finally step out of the darkness and come out into the light, or is she going to remain in the darkness, subtly dropping LGBT Easter eggs like this one, the 419 connection, for her fans? To further substantiate this reading, DJ Crocs draws a connection between the title of the Swift album and Dickinson's reputation as tortured poet, saying, okay, who is a more tortured poet than Emily Dickinson? Saying, in other words, this album has got to be about Dickinson, advancing and cementing an interpretation of Swift as LGBT artist and of Dickinson as LGBT poet. In both online fan cultures, fans are thus engaged in reparative reading, or what you might, given their focus on content creation, call reparative writing, producing queer content in the text to find emotional sustenance in this. They are thus engaged in what we might call tailoring the texts, pun intended, altering the fabric of the text to find hidden textual and textural layers. Their practices are thus quite literally reparative in the sense of holes or gaps that fans themselves have signalled in scholarship, biographical accounts, or the lore surrounding the artists, being patched up and thus new layers of meaning being added. Thus, the fans produce, shape, and cement new images of both Dickinson and Swift at once, and alter the Swift and Dickinson lore to fit the world that they wish to see. What is interesting, however, is that fans base their connections on the Johnson edition of the poems. In the Johnson edition, poem 419 points to the poem, We Grow Accustomed to the Dark, but of course the other Dickinson editions would lead to other potential poems and perhaps other potential readings. So let's briefly take a look at A Toad Can Die of Light, which is poem 419 in the Franklin edition. Not because I wish to argue that the Swift fans have overlooked a particular dimension, but instead to show that reading Swift and Dickinson in conjunction, as the fans do, is a very productive interpretive practice. The poem, very briefly, states that in the face of death, we're all the same. No matter what our title or rank, we all die. So why swagger, since in death, you're no different from a gnat? So for lack of time, I'm assuming that you're all somewhat familiar with this poem. Life, however, is another matter, as the speaker states in the second stanza. In life, you may certainly swagger when considering the bare rhyme that is your life when it is naked of flask, naked of cask. Here, we perhaps see the speaker engaging in pure, unadulterated joy when considering her ruby within. So what is this ruby? Presumably, it's what remains when the flask or cask, the outer trappings, are gone. Famously, Dickinson described her poetry to Thomas Wentworth Higginson in 1862 as her thought undressed. So might we thus read the ruby within as referring to Dickinson's poetry, her thought transferred to the page, which, when its force explodes, as Dickinson put it in another 1862 letter to Higginson, left her bare and charred. Here, then, we perhaps see the speaker finding cause for swagger, unrestrained joy at that which is within, and which will remain when the vessel is gone, that is, her poetry or her thought transferred to the page and to future readers. So taking the Franklin version of poem 419 thus makes for a potential reading of the joyful side of Dickinson, reveling in the joy of her own creations that may exist alongside the reading of Dickinson as tortured poet. And this is, of course, a serendipitous or aleatory reading I was put on the track of because of the presupposed connection between the Swift album and poem 419. In other words, through reading Dickinson and Swift in tandem in this playful, aleatory way, we might get yet another image of Dickinson and of Swift added onto their already existing images in the public domain. In this case, the image of artist reveling in her creative power. Indeed, we might pair Franklin 419 with the liner notes for the Tortured Poets department, which is Swift's poem In Summation, in which we might see Swift as depicting herself as poet, reveling in her own artistry and her skill with words. In conclusion, the interpretations that Dickinson and Swift fans enter into online are speculative, playful, and wild in the sense of both not necessarily based in fact and unbridled. And in the workshop at the end of this session, we've put together poem and song pairing so that we and the audience members may engage, as I would hope, in this practice of reparative writing ourselves. In other words, to engage in tailoring these texts, that is, reading them wildly and altering their fabric to see what meanings we may produce through reading Dickinson and Swift together. I'm looking forward to seeing what may come of this playful way of reading and writing. So thank you for this.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Saskia. That was wonderful. I love that tailoring. That's a brilliant idea. I've never heard of that before. Wonderful. Okay, our next speaker is Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Saskia, I'm still seeing your screen being shared. Okay, cool. So I will share my screen now. You can all see it. Perfect. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Dinneny, and my presentation is about Taylor Swift's versions and eras and how we might use that to think about Dickinson and thinking about the two of them together. So fans, critics, and scholars have all observed connections between Swift and Dickinson, the women, and their works. For this paper, I'm focusing on the affordances of reading their discussions of fame together. At first, this might seem strange. Dickinson was, of course, not famous during her lifetime, whereas Taylor Swift is one of the most famous and wealthy people alive. Despite this immense difference, both poets, if I might call Swift one, spent a lot of time thinking and writing about celebrity. Many have drawn connections between Dickinson's poetry and Swift's most indie-sounding albums, Folklore and Evermore. However, those albums actually rarely consider fame. Swift's more pop work, like albums Reputation and The Tortured Poets Department, most explicitly discuss her relationship with celebrity. Take, for example, the Reputation album prologue, styled as a newspaper titled, Here's Something I've Learned About People. She begins, "We think we know someone, but the truth is that we only know the version of them they've chosen to show us. We know our friend in a certain light, but we don't know them the way their lover does." She writes that she's been in the public eye since she was 15, and that the public cannot know her. She says that gossip blogs will attempt to connect men to each of the songs on Reputation, as if she writes, quote, "The inspiration for music is as simple and basic as a paternity test. There will be slideshows of photos backing up each incorrect theory because it's 2017, and if you didn't see a picture of it, it couldn't have happened, right?" As Dickinson scholars, I think we know this lesson, that we are only able to make sense of Dickinson through the archive, through letters, scraps, and other material remnants of her life. In other words, we know that our research isn't a paternity test. We know that we can't fully know her, but only the versions of her that we assemble out of fragments. Swift and Dickinson share perspectives on fandom. Scholars like Finnerty have written about celebrity and Dickinson and her contemporaries' imaginations. 19th century celebrity culture was especially fascinated with the dead, including pilgrimages and biography reading. Finnerty reads All Overgrown with Cunning Moss and I Went to Thank Her, in which speakers visit graves in the context of celebrity. He observes that the poems associate a fan's, quote, intrusive admiration with disappointment, absence, and death. Taylor Swift, funnily enough, has used a ghostly framework to discuss fame as well. The Reputation album rollout began with the music video for the song Look What You Made Me Do, a retaliatory song about the media and various contradictory public perceptions of her. The music video begins in a graveyard, and the camera zooms into a gravestone that reads, "Here lies Taylor Swift's reputation." Then a zombie version of Swift claws out of the dirt, singing, "I don't like your little games, I don't like your tilted stage." Taylor Swift's reputation is undead. As a living person, Swift continues to be scrutinized and admired by the public, and the perception of her is always changing. As the video goes on, we see many different versions of Taylor Swift supporting Dickinson's own conception of celebrity, but the public cannot know the private individual person. And these are the various versions.
Elizabeth, sorry.
If I can jump in here, your slides aren't projecting. We're still on the first slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Can you see the movement now?
When you move it, yeah. I mean, can you put it so that it's going through the slideshow? Or do you not want to do that?
I did have that happening.
Okay.
So maybe let me try something else really quickly. Sorry about that. I did
Sorry to
wasn't able.
interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I wasn't able to see the chat, so it's helpful.
Yeah.
Let me try something else. Share. Let me just do maybe full screen and that'll work. How about now?
There we go. I
Yeah.
think.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll just have to. Yeah. Good.
Okay, perfect. So I will go back. So this is Emily Dickinson's grave, and then you can see the Taylor Swift music video grave. It says "Here lies Taylor Swift's reputation," and then that's zombie Taylor Swift coming out of the ground. You can all see that.
Yes, it's great.
Yes. Great.
Okay. And then these are the various versions of Taylor Swift from the different eras as well in the music video. But Reputation, the album, which the song is in, is old news. It came out in 2017. One of Swift's more recent albums, The Tortured Poets Department, spends much of its time expressing anger and sometimes real rage at the expectations and judgments of the public. These songs communicate the frustration of being misunderstood by people who've assembled their own understanding of you through the limited materials available to them. Like Swift, many versions of Dickinson have existed, and we've seen that. So reception of The Tortured Poets was quite mixed. Critics and fans noted that the album was perhaps her most self-referential and even most self-indulgent. 2 hours after the album came out, it was expanded into an anthology, a double LP. So the album went from 12 songs to 31. So it became over 2 hours as one of her longest albums, maybe her longest album. Pitchfork in a review found that the album's writing was, quote, at best playfully unbridled and at worst conspicuously wanting for an editor. Many agreed that Swift's writing's particularly uneven in this album. Maybe she wrote the lyrics quickly and passionately with less regard for polish than usual. The album was famously released after the end of a public situationship with Matty Healy, lead singer of the 1975. She was also, of course, in the middle of a record-breaking world tour when she supposedly wrote, recorded, and produced the 31 songs, something that she directly addresses in the album's 13th track, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. She was maybe under the most scrutiny of this tour of 139 shows, each 3.5 hours long, and all of which were live streamed, filmed, and available as clips across social media. In Australia, Swift told a concert crowd that she, quote, needed songwriting more than she ever had while writing Tortured Poets. That the consistent criticism of the album is that it needed an editor makes reading Swift alongside Dickinson even more interesting. Dickinson rarely published, of course, in part due to a suspicion of celebrity culture and this kind of romantic attachment to the private self. But we do have so many drafts, correspondence about edits with Higginson and Susan Dickinson, and of course the fascicles. Criticism of Swift's lyrics enshrined as songs in The Tortured Poets and all of her other albums proves Dickinson's point. It's worth emphasizing the obvious difference. Dickinson chose not to publish, and Swift did. There are countless reasons for this difference, contemporary gender expectations undoubtedly playing a major role. Swift has always written confessional lyrics, as many critics have pointed out. This writing invites the close analysis of fandom, which helps cultivate the many versions of Swift that exist in the public imagination. It isn't just gossip sites that connect lyrics to paparazzi photos. Her fans do it too, as Saskia talked about, and her writing has encouraged this. Her international tour celebrated the many versions of herself that she's performed on a public stage. The Eras Tour also coincided with the re-release of some of Swift's albums called Taylor's Versions to reclaim the rights of her music, which was owned by a private equity firm. The fight over ownership of her discography recalls the fight over Dickinson's manuscripts. Ownership in both cases affects reception of the work. Swift understandably wanted more control over her legacy, and I'm sure also to make more money. Swift has intentionally created versions of herself. These versions align with eras, making her public persona a neatly packaged marketing product to support albums' release cycles. She isn't alone in this, she just might be the best at it. All that said, in Tortured Poets, Swift rejects her own fandom for the first time. While Reputation railed against the media, several songs in this newer album take aim at obsessive and invasive fans. Throughout Tortured Poets, Swift sings of critics, sometimes in the form of nameless townspeople, sometimes just an ambiguous mass of people. This isn't new, but what is new is that these people claim to care about her. For example, in the song titled But Daddy, I Love Him, Swift pokes at townspeople who disapprove of her romantic relationship. She finds the comments and opinions of the townspeople who claim to care for her to be oppressive. She resents their belief that they know what's best for her, suggesting that they don't know Swift at all. To the quote, Sarahs and Hannahs clutching their pearls in their Sunday best, she sings, I'd rather burn my whole life down than listen to all this bitching and moaning. She describes their long-standing judgments as a cage that she was raised in. The townspeople sound like Swift's fans who share their opinions on every aspect of her public life, like clothes, romantic interests, and music across social media. In this song, she resents the intimacy that she has in some ways created. When a person makes themselves into a product in an age of unprecedented and constant public scrutiny, the line between the individual and the celebrity starts to blur, as does the line between the public and private self. In the song Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, Swift is transformed into a ghost that haunts a town of critics. The song directly addresses the critics as you, placing the listener in the position of antagonist. In the chorus, she sings, So I leap from the gallows and I levitate down your street. Then she screams, Who's afraid of little old me? It's intense and uncomfortable. The song feels like an accusation because it is. In the outro, she returns to the image of the cage, singing, You caged me and then you called me crazy. Like the zombie in her music video, the version of Swift in this song is made undead by public opinion. As a ghost, she revolts against the fandom that created her. Anna Kornblue writes that we're in an age of immediacy, that we're surrounded by the breakdown of interpretation, where meaning is stated rather than mediated. We can see this in autofiction, first-person narratives, and other media. Taylor Swift's celebrity persona is immediate. Fans imagine they have instant access to her interiority in her songs because of her confessional style, not to mention the endless stream of content about her produced online. Swift's frustration in Tortured Poets indicates the danger of this collapse between private and public persona of immediate celebrity. So to get back to Emily Dickinson, we can't make demands of Dickinson like fans make demands of Swift. Obviously, Emily Dickinson is dead, for one. But more importantly, her poetry requires the work of mediation. So we might learn from something from Dickinson's romanticism. Maybe despite technology and social pressures to the contrary, we should preserve some of our individual interiority. Maybe, like some of my students say, some things belong in the drafts. And that is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was brilliant. I'm learning so much about Taylor Swift. I love the connection of the ghosts. And Dickinson's very famous for the posthumous speakers and people speaking after from beyond the grave. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So Li-hsin, it's over to you now.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I would like to really begin by confessing that I'm also not really a Taylor Swift fan. Till now, I'm converting myself into one because in anticipation of this panel, I've been listening to Taylor Swift every day just to prepare for the panel. And also, I would like to thank all my panelists. This is such a dream panel come true. Kimberly was actually the one who started this idea, saying like, why don't we have a Swift and Dickinson panel? And then, so I really appreciate everyone chipping in. Also, Páraic and Helen kindly offered to co-chair this panel. So this is really a star panel for me. I'm the least really like well equipped for this. So I would like to start my talk this time by continuing this conversation about reception and celebrity. But here we do a little bit more of a historical back lens here by looking at Taylor Swift's and Dickinson's conversation with William Wordsworth. I wonder whether you can see my PowerPoint okay?
Do you want to practice
Great.
flipping between slides since that seems to be the problem?
Good idea. Can you see
Perfect.
this
Yeah.
now?
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay, wonderful. Right, so at first glance, placing Dickinson and Swift in conversation with Wordsworth seem a bit unexpected. In fact, both Dickinson and Swift have been known for their engagement with Wordsworth in private conversational relationships poetically. By reading Dickinson's personal correspondence alongside Swift's folklore tracks, The Lakes and Seven, we can see how both invoke Windermere and the Lake District as poetic touchstones. You can see the picture of the Lake District, Windermere, in 2022 when it was sunny. So connections between Swift and Dickinson are often traced through Swift's ninth studio album, Evermore, released on December 11th, 2020, just one day after Dickinson's birthday. Today, however, I would like to turn to his sister record, Folklore, released earlier that July. If these albums can be read as a dual homage, first to Wordsworth in summer and then to Dickinson in winter, it becomes interesting or like meaningful in a way to examine the triangulated relationship among these three writers. So we will begin with Dickinson. Wordsworth's poetry was immensely popular in 19th century America. The Dickinson family library held multiple editions, and her father, Edward Dickinson, praised Wordsworth in 1828, as you can see the first quote, one of the few poets who will be read in the next generation. He notes that, along with the delicious melodies which he pours forth, he has thought on every page. Well, for Dickinson, who her sister Lavinia described as the only one of us who had to think, this thoughtful Wordsworth held appeal. Yet Dickinson's engagement is marked by playful ambivalence. Rather than reverence, she adopts a tone of equality, even rivalry. You could see in the second quote, in a July 27th, 1852 letter to Susan, she writes, "We're seven and one in heaven. We're three next Saturday, if I have mine and heaven has none." Here she evokes Wordsworth's poem We Are Seven to calculate the emotional arithmetic of her own intimate world with Susan, especially transforming his poem into some kind of personal correspondence. By the mid-1860s, Dickinson's Wordsworthian reference becomes more conceptually competitive. You can see in the third quote, in an early March 1866 letter to Elizabeth Holland, she writes, "February passed like a sketch, and I know much. Here is a light that the stranger said was not on sea or land. Myself could arrest it, but will not chagrin him." Well, as I have argued elsewhere, this suggests some kind of competitiveness in Dickinson's refusal to embarrass Wordsworth. Here he refers to Wordsworth as the stranger, suggesting some kind of geographical distance. So some kind of this suggests competitiveness in Dickinson's refusal to embarrass Wordsworth about his light that never was on sea or land, a reference to his Peel Castle elegy. Dickinson's attempt to arrest this poetic light turns her Wordsworthian resonance into a poetic connoisseurship, but materializing what Wordsworth declared irretrievable, Dickinson positions herself as a transatlantic competitor rather than a passive disciple. By 1873, Dickinson transformed the Lake District into a mental and domestic landscape. Writing to her cousin Louisa and Frances Norcross, she reflects, "I think of your little parlor as the poets once thought of Windermere, peace, sunshine, and books." She then appends the poem here, I think that was also mentioned by in Elizabeth's brilliant keynote earlier. "There is no frigate like a book to take us lengths away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul." Here, Windermere becomes a past tense ideal, as the poet once thought here. Yet Dickinson reconstructs it within the intimate space of her cousin's parlors. Books become frugal vehicles of imaginative travel, allowing her to traverse the Atlantic without leaving Amherst. Wordsworth's landscape is thus internalized, domesticated, and reimagined as a portable mindscape. We will then move on to Swift here. Turning now to Swift, we encounter Windermere transformed once again. In folklore, Swift explicitly engages with Wordsworth's Lake District, but where Dickinson sought creative rivalry, Swift seeks refuge. Her references to Windermere and the lakes evokes a space of withdrawal from the relentless scrutiny of contemporary celebrity culture, which has been so discussed so brilliantly in Elizabeth's talking on this panel. Is it romantic how all my elegies eulogize me? I'm not cut out for all these cynical clones. These hunters with cell phones take me to the lakes where all the poets went to die. I don't belong in my beloved, neither do you. Those Windermere peaks look like a perfect place to cry. I'm setting off, but not without you, without my muse. She also plays on Wordsworth's name through a moment of self-reflexive critique, foregrounding anxieties about authorship, value, and public reception. I've come too far to watch some name-dropping sleaze tell me what are my words worth. You can see the second quote here. Well, Dickinson frames Wordsworth's landscape as an intellectual site of peace, sunshine, and books. Swift renders it as an elegiac, melancholic retreat, a symbolic space associated with artistic exhaustion, emotional vulnerability, and withdrawal from public life. For Swift, the Lake District becomes not a sunny parlor, but a site of poetic retreat, an insulated environment for emotional recuperation. It represents an imagined escape from an increasingly digitized world where artistic expression is constantly mediated, commodified, and exposed. Wordsworth's Windermere thus becomes a pastoral romantic sanctuary through which Swift negotiates the pressure of visibility, fame, and creative survival. This engagement extends beyond geography into temporality and subjectivity. You can see in the final quote here in 7, Swift revisits childhood as a space of unrestrained perception and emotional intensity. Please picture me in the trees. I hit my peak at 7 feet in the swing over the creek. I was too scared to jump in. Scholar like Ellie McCollin sees 7 as Swift's modern-day take on William Wordsworth's 1807 ode intermissions of immortality from recollections of early childhood. She argues that Swift writes about childhood throughout her work as being indebted to the Romantic poets, especially Wordsworth. Swift's treatment of childhood echoes Wordsworth's account of early imaginative freedom, its gradual loss, as well as the constraint of adulthood. So we will move on to the conclusion now. While their receptions of Wordsworth diverge here, both Dickinson and Swift turn to Wordsworth as a means of negotiating their relationships to creativity, audience, and artistic identity. For Dickinson, Wordsworth is a stranger, a poetic predecessor whose elusive visionary gleam she seeks to actively arrest and materialize within her own frostier New England idiom. For Swift, Wordsworth represents a symbolic predecessor, a figure of artistic authenticity whose Windermere offers a timeless refuge from the pressures of modern publicity and digital exposure. Through both writers, Wordsworth's Lake District is transformed. It becomes a shared imaginative terrain, a living creative commons continuously reinterpreted across time and space. In this sense, Windermere is no longer only a geographical location, but a transatlantic, transhistorical site of artistic negotiation. So those reimaginings remind us how contemporary writers and artists continue to seek spaces, both literal and imaginative, in which to think, to write, to create beyond the constraints of their moment. So I would like to end this presentation by sharing the two pictures here. The first one is the one you can see on the left-hand side when the Windermere was really rainy and cold and gloomy. The small figure at the back, that was me trying to jump into the lake to go for a swim in such a cold, chilly summer wind. And the one on your right-hand side, that's the one of the small lakes at the top of the glen where you can see where Wordsworth Michael was composed. Right, so I will stop my sharing now here, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Li-hsin. Wow, that was amazing. Wow, the great connections between Wordsworth, Dickinson, and Swift. I love that. So now our next speaker is Jeannette.
Good morning, everyone. I am going to try this and then see. Everyone saw that screen change?
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'll go ahead and start. So thank you so much, Li-hsin, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. This is such a delight. I am Jenny Schollaert. I earned my PhD at University of Maryland, where I served with Elizabeth as co-project manager of the Dickinson Electronic Archives for 6 years, or 6 semesters. Wow, 6 semesters. And I now work at the University of Maryland Libraries in Special Collections. So I'm excited to talk with you today about Dickinson Core and the Cottagecore aesthetics of Emily Dickinson and Taylor Swift. So I had mentioned the Dickinson Electronic Archive, and my interest in this topic grew out of a digital exhibition that Elizabeth and I published in December 2021 during our tenure, and with the support of Executive Director Martha Nell Smith. Thanks, Martha Nell. So Martha encouraged Elizabeth and I to follow our interests as co-project managers, which resulted in this digital exhibition. And you'll note the time that this exhibit was released in 2021. This was Elizabeth and I's pandemic project, really inspired by the release of Evermore at the end of 2020. So the COVID pandemic is a really interesting and generative marker because this is also when cottagecore as an aesthetic trend or vibe, however you'd like to categorize it, really boomed in popularity. So the intense sheltering necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic forced many of us to remain inside or to limit our activity in outdoor spaces to spaces that could be experienced at great social distance. So large parks, forests, gardens, the like. The terror of the pandemic, as well as its tedium, led many to develop hobbies or obsessions, including Taylor Swift, as we'll discuss with her Folklore and Evermore albums, both released in 2020. So before we turn to Swift and Dickinson, it's worth discussing cottagecore as an aesthetic in its own right. The clippings on the right side of the slide here give some sense of cottagecore's aesthetic principles and investments. To my eye, cottagecore cohered as an aesthetic in online spaces before moving into the physical world to influence the culture at large and inform what products became available to further fuel and dress the aesthetic. While there is no definitive definition of cottagecore yet, the aesthetic draws on capital R romantic investments in walking, leisure, and appreciation of nature, with many Pinterest vision boards, including baskets full of foraged or gathered plants, handcrafts, and baked goods. So excellent timing to follow Li-hsin with this discussion. So unlike romantic or even transcendentalist movements, cottagecore is gendered feminine. Its community is multiracial, so Alexis Nicole Brown, the Instagram creator known by her handle Black Forager, is an excellent example of a Black woman forager whose fashion and graphic design aesthetic maps to cottagecore. But at least on my algorithm, the dominant aesthetic skews very white. To that end, it's worth thinking about the ways that the cottagecore aesthetic was primarily popularized online during a period when many of us were entirely too online, such that the aesthetic is inseparable from algorithms and online vision boards. Ironic for an aesthetic so tied to handicrafts and the outdoors. So as these clippings also note, the investments of cottagecore in handcraft, in relationship to the natural world, the intimacy of the domestic sphere, these are not new. Such trends have a long history, including Marie Antoinette's construction of a small-scale but fully operational farm on the grounds of Versailles so that she could pretend to play at farming. And as this example notes, cottagecore implies some degree of leisure time and whimsy rather than labor. Some have referenced William Morris's arts and crafts movement of the 19th century as another precursor to cottagecore, but I hesitate to do so given Morris's political commitments to art and beauty as human rights and his investment in socialism, as well as the masculinity of the Comscott Press's printing labor. The politics of cottagecore are messy and muddled at best to my eyes, but I do see similarities in appreciation of craft and botanical knowledge. So I'll move back to 2020, when Taylor Swift's two albums of the year, Folklore and Evermore, became inextricable from the rise of cottagecore. Both albums are steeped in the natural, in forested and textured kind of visions, and a craft aesthetic. And you can see the images to the right of the slide here, which we have the two album covers of Folklore and Evermore, as well as two images from the kind of Folklore Moment of the Eras tour. So the black and white album cover for Folklore features a small Swift, surrounded and almost subsumed by the tall forest around her. The trees dominate the cover, though I find it difficult to identify exactly what kind of trees these are. Specificity does not seem to be the point here, rather than the general aesthetic. Literally, we can't see the trees for the forest. And in her Instagram post announcing Folklore's release, Swift describes the process of imagining the album. And I have the post here, and I think it's quite worth reading a bit of this. So, quote, "It started with imagery, visuals that popped into my mind and piqued my curiosity. Stars drawn around scars, a cardigan that still bears the scent of lost 20 years later, battleships sinking into the ocean, down, 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 the trees swing in the woods of my childhood, hushed tones of let's run away and never doing it, a mere disco ball hovering above a dance floor." And then towards the end, I think the second to last full paragraph, "A tale that becomes folklore is one that is passed down and whispered around, sometimes even sung about. The lines between fantasy and reality blur, and the boundaries between truth and fiction become almost indiscernible. Speculation, over time, becomes fact. Myths, ghost stories, and fables, someone's secrets written in the sky for all to behold." So I love this kind of additional textual culture of Swift's here. And it's worth reading aloud because so many of Swift's foundational comments in this folklore announcement resonate with Dickinson's poetry. Setting aside the disco balls, how we speak about Dickinson resonates with Swift's interest here in someone's secrets written in the sky for all to behold, and the utility of natural metaphors to the expression of larger ideals and concepts. It's of interest here that Swift insists that the visuals came first for the album and then the stories. Her emphasis on whisper, ghosts, and myth conjure the trappings of cottagecore, but skews the aesthetic towards the darker edges of the woods, rather than the opposite extreme of cottagecore that trends towards a cutesy, almost like precious moments kind of kitsch. It's in this subversive potential of uncovering the secrets or mythology of the woods that I find most generative about cottagecore, particularly in the way that these rhetorical moves can be used to express or inspire queer readings. Which brings me to Dickinson and cottagecore. Dickinson is often considered in conversations about cottagecore aesthetics for her iconic white dress, which recalls the Hill House home's signature nap dress. This became the uniform of elite white women willing to pay in the upper triple digits for a house dress during the pandemic lockdown. And it became kind of an emblem of cottagecore. It looks very similar to Dickinson's dress, and I bet you she did not pay $900 for that. So too did Dickinson's herbaria become tied to cottagecore and pandemic distractions as flower gathering and foraging became increasingly popular pastimes. The rise in popularity of cottagecore during the height of the pandemic also coincided with the showrun of Alina Smith's excellent Apple TV Plus show, Dickinson, which offered an anachronistic vision of Dickinson as a teenager, played by Haley Steinfeld and mentioned earlier in Saskia's presentation. So kind of given this constellation of cottagecore resonances across Swift and Dickinson, I'd like to turn now to a closer consideration of two texts. First, Swift's song Ivy from Evermore and Dickinson's poem and variants to What Mystery Pervades a Well. So beginning with Swift, Ivy is iconic. It's already been referenced multiple times today, and it's one of the standout offerings in Evermore. The soft guitar begins the song, a haunting melody that speaks of a love triangle between the singer, a married woman, who is addressing her lover and describing her fear of her husband discovering her feelings for the addressee. I'll read some selections from the slide aloud, which begins with the first 3 lines of the song, skips to the bridge, and then includes the closing chorus. So how's one to know? I'd meet you where the spirit meets the bones in a faith-forgotten land. The bridge, clover blooms in the fields, springs break loose, the time is near. What would he do if he found us out? Crescent moon, coast is clear, spring breaks loose, but so does fear. He's going to burn this house to the ground. And how's one to know? I'm so sorry. Oh, I can't stop putting roots in my dreamland, my house of stone, your ivy grows, and now I'm covered in you. So if you're seeing resonances between the lyrics and the love triangle between Susan, Emily, and Dickinson, you're not alone. As Saskia already discussed, this song became emblematic of Dickinson television show fans and who claimed this song as the anthem for the quote-unquote Emmy Sue relationship. Alina Smith, the creator of Dickinson, also saw these resonances, and she was able to secure Swift's permission to use the song in the closing credits of the penultimate episode of the series, which is season 3, episode 9. Notably, the song plays after Susan and Emily reconcile and have sex after Emily forgives Susan for publishing one of her poems. That Swift gave her permission for the use of the song is exciting, and it fanned the flames of some online communities invested in both Swift's potential queerness, long speculated about, but also in fans kind of seeing this scholarly consideration of Dickinson and Susan for the first time, perhaps, on screen. So on its own merits, however, I find Ivy to be a compelling description of haunted love, forcefully embodied in the opening lines of Spirit Meeting Bone. Yet this embodied love seems to belong to a closed chapter by this, or like an unclear chapter by the song's end. After describing close calls, secret trysts that align to phases of the moon and the threat of masculine violence, the chorus repeats a line that can read as a frustration, a lament, a resignation, or a promise. I can't stop putting roots in my dreamland, my house of stone, your ivy grows. So here Swift makes good on the promise the ascetic described in her announcement of folklore, a song that is visually compelling and emotionally rich while making space for multiple interpretations. And this brings me to Dickinson's poem. On a meta level, I have to admit that I had trouble narrowing down which Dickinson poem I wanted to pair with Ivy for this presentation. There are simply too many directions to take such a comparison, all of which are valuable and tantalizing. So as I was revisiting Judith Farr's The Gardens of Emily Dickinson, I was struck by her reading of What Mystery Pervades a Well. Like many of Dickinson's poems, What Mystery Pervades a Well features variants and a fascinating publication history. The version here is the Johnson, as well as a variant of the final 2 stanzas. So the Johnson poem begins, I'll read it on the slide. What mystery pervades a well, that water lives so far, a neighbor from another world residing in a jar, whose limit none has ever seen, but just his lid of glass, like looking every time you please in an abyss's face. The grass does not appear afraid. I often wonder he can stand so close and look so bold at what is awe to me. Related somehow they may be, the sedge stands near the sea, where he is floorless and does not timidity betray. But nature is a stranger yet, the ones that sight her most have never passed her haunted house nor simplified her ghost. To pity those that know her not is helped by the regret that those who know her less, the nearer her they get. So here, the consideration of the water that lives in the other world of the well can point to this limitless world akin to an abyss and seemingly separate the water from the land. And I love how this recalls Swift's image of a shipwreck in an ocean, down, 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 that holds so many secrets. But Dickinson returns to the land from the sea of the well and uses the juxtaposition to defamiliarize the landed, forested nature. Here, the myths and mystique of the natural world are alluded to, as is their opacity. Nature is a stranger, a ghost that cannot be simplified or entered fully, even though we see it and can encounter it. Even as one enters the natural world, certainty is a paradox as more unknowns are revealed and encountered. There is no mastery, there's no objective scientific knowledge or power over nature. As each time one supposes knowledge, one must reckon with the immensity of what remains unknown. The awe and respect for the unknowability and immensity of the natural world in this poem is similar to the description of the capaciousness of the natural world that Swift flirts with in her 2 Cottagecore albums. To me, none of her songs, of Swift's songs, are wholly about nature as such. She uses natural imagery and metaphor to describe heartaches and human emotions. As such, nature remains a stranger unknowable in and of itself, even to the ones that cite her most. But what makes this poem an even more kind of powerful pair with Ivy is the variant of the last two paragraphs dated 1877. And so I'll just read the first one. Instead of nature, we see Susan, right? But Susan is a stranger yet. The ones who cite her most have never scaled her haunted house nor compromised her ghost. So the striking substitution of Susan for nature activates the metaphorical potential of the lovers in Ivy. Yet instead of the ivy covering a house of stone, Sue takes the place of nature as both a stranger and the haunted house to be scaled. Sue is the structure, the haunted house of stone, and the speaker of the poem, who's Emily, observes the disconnect between the ones who cite Susan and the ones who can scale her house to try and compromise her ghost. The first stanza remains the same, or the final stanza remains the same, but is altogether changed. Who is Dickinson describing with what amount of wit, irony, or seriousness as those who do not know Susan despite their perceived closeness? Presumably, those who cite Susan the most are her husband, but this could also be those who claim her friendship and intimacy without knowing or being admitted entrance to the greater degree of intimacy that she and Emily share. This greater intimacy would afford Emily the confidence or superior vantage point to claim the distance between Sue and others. Yet the poem would then also turn on its writer and implicate Emily as one perhaps to be pitied as well. So Ivy and What Mystery Pervades a Well speak across centuries about the triangulation of love, intimacy, and secrecy, all while playing with a parallel intimacy with the natural world. At times, the natural world is instrumentalized in service of a poetic point, but in Dickinson's poem, the natural world also serves as a counterpoint or stand-in for her love equal to Susan. So the embrace of Dickinson by adherents of the cottagecore aesthetic opens the aesthetic to queer readings and queer possibility, underscored particularly by the variants of What Mystery Pervades a Well and other poems and correspondence of Dickinson's. Swift's cottagecore era, too, opened a space of possibility for musical experimentation beyond the sugary country and pop that she was previously known for. And critics universally praised the depth and risks of Folklore and Evermore, with the latter particularly receiving acclaim. On a personal note, it was Evermore that made me a Swiftie, though I don't know if I would claim that term anymore due to Swift's kind of subsequent shifts. So Swift followed Evermore with Midnights, then the Tortured Poets Department, and most recently, we've had The Life of a Showgirl, which I think is the most disappointing turn in Swift's recent offerings that coincided with her relationship with Kansas City Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce. So the album cover for The Life of a Showgirl is as synthetic as the woods of Folklore and Evermore are natural. And it's hard for me to separate my disappointment in Swift's turn to traditional gender roles and the bleaker, more heteronormative lyrics from my disappointment and skepticism of the tradwife phenomenon. So tradwifery has kind of existed on the edges of cottagecore since cottagecore's boom in 2020, with content creators chronicling their sourdough starters in spacious yards. And one of the most famous of these is Hannah Neeleman, known by her handle Ballerina Farm. So in an eerie resonance with Neeleman, Swift's latest album expresses a desire for traditional home life with a man we presume to be Kelce. Even her engagement announcement takes her out of the university campus of the Tortured Poets departments and regresses to high school. Your English teacher and your gym teacher are getting married here. And I have a lot more thoughts about cottagecore kind of moving towards tradwifery and kind of Swift's flirtation with tradwifery. A lot of folks have been reading kind of Yesteryear and the kind of queerness introduced and weaponized in Yesteryear. I won't spoil it for folks. Leads to some very kind of complicated resonances with Swift's own turn towards kind of flirting with reproductive, compulsory reproduction. But in the interest of time, I'll say that this work is, of course, an expansion of that Dickinson Electronic Archives exhibition, but very much still a work in progress. So I'm hoping to expand this thinking about plant humanities and a return to craft, but I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Jeannette. Wow, that was wonderful. I learned so much about Tradewife and cottagecore, but I especially loved your reading of Ivy and What Mystery Pervades a Well. That was wonderful. So our next speaker is Kimberly.
Wow. Oh no. Okay. Can y'all see that?
Yes.
And can I flip between slides?
Yes.
Fabulous. All right. Slightly changed my presentation's name here. Okay, cool. All right, yeah, here we go. Sorry, I am at another conference that has been very long. And this is a whole other world that is tangentially related to the conference I'm at, which is a creative writing conference. So it's been great to kind of re-immerse myself in Dickinson, but I do feel a little fuzzy, like I'm coming to you as like a ghost instead of a full human. All right, I digress greatly. 'Twas awkward, but it fitted me. Dickinson meets Swift, as in the television show. Each century in America, we find a tall blonde poet to enrapture us. In the 19th century, we had Emily Dickinson. In the 20th century, Sylvia Plath. And in the 21st, we, of course, have Dickinson's distant relative, Taylor Swift. What would these writers think of one another if they were able to meet face to face? In season 3, episode 7 of Alina Smith's Apple Plus TV series Dickinson, the titular poet time travels, in fact, to 1955, where she meets a snarky Plath during her Smith college years. It doesn't really go well. The third season was the last of the show, but perhaps in an imaginary fourth, we'd have gotten some more time traveling, and Dickinson and Swift might meet. Which era would it be? During Swift's early years, pre-Nashville, on the Christmas tree farm, dancing under the sparkling lights, bundled up in mittens and coats. Or later, as Swift straddles country and pop, breaking out of one genre and into the limelight of critical acclaim. Maybe her Red era? The show could contrast Dickinson's centuries' more muted hues and Swift's sad, beautiful, tragic aura. Though Dickinson meeting with a bee-flanneled, red-lipped Plath in season 3 of the show perhaps provides that color contrast already. It couldn't be Swift now. Too famous, too ubiquitous, marrying a football player in Madison Square Garden to the delight of every Swiftie and horror of every New Yorker. Impossible for Dickinson to parse. Well, unless the show sent Swift back in time instead. Yeah, to the homestead. Dickinson alone in her room, puzzling through how to configure the smallest moment on the page. Dickinson might not be able to relate to the view of Portofino or all of that wood on Swift's mind, but Swift could relish in a slowdown. But no. I think the best moment in the Swift eras to place Dickinson within would have to be the pandemic albums, Folklore and Evermore. Dickinson would benefit on screen from meeting a somewhat subdued but very famous Swift, who has been forced to be more alone than usual, as we all were, forced to look more inward, even deeper than she has before in lyric and in tune. There's something about the pandemic generally as an era that we all sort of want to forget. Is that what the Civil War felt like to Dickinson? Is that why she writes around rather than through it? The music video for the lead single on Evermore dropped the same day as the album, December 11th, 2020. Would you believe me if I told you that I chose that song to talk about before I realized it dropped the day after Dickinson's 190th birthday? Somehow the potential plot, like the snow always seems to in a poem seeped in Amherst, thickens. Swift ends the music video for that lead single, Willow, decked in a high-necked dress Dickinson could have worn culturally further back than the cardigan she appears in when the music video opens. Though we'll put aside the connection between the music video for Cardigan, which debuted that pandemic summer, and Willow, in order to address the privilege of Swift being able to film at all during this time. Did the pandemic even touch Swift the way it did the rest of us? Though accounts ensure us that the strict COVID-19 safety protocols were followed in the making of the music video, and we can see in it the witches of the coven scene masked, we must acknowledge that there was privilege involved to be able to make art at that scale during that time. Dickinson lived in the North during the Civil War. She didn't have the same contact with enslaved and formerly enslaved African Americans as, say, Higginson did. She was able to keep her distance from the worst of the deadliest war in U.S. history, though not the deadliest on U.S. soil. Renee Berglund writes of her during this time. In the face of defeat, death, and loneliness, Dickinson longed for companionship. She knew that she could find solace in her sense of kinship with the non-human world. This is the murkiest part of my writing, so I've just popped up this slide so there's awareness that I know there's a lot more going on than in my brief sort of prosy poem paper that I'm reading right now. Distance from the war left Dickinson with privilege, yes, but also a profound aloneness that sent her into her work and into nature. Two haunts we know she loved haunting. Does Dickinson find Swift on the secret New York set for Willow? Backstaged faces, hiding behind N95s, everything eerily silent. We were afraid to even talk, remember? Everything eerily silent except for the witch's cape's rustles, the loud hum of a machine pumping fake snow onto the set. Does Dickinson cast herself as an outsider? Does she show herself by coming within 6 feet of the star? What does she make of all the video equipment? Surely money and fame are what allowed Swift to shoot the video for Willow in the year 2020, a year we rarely speak of in detail. Apparently, the crew didn't know that the video was even for a new album or a new song. What did they think they were up to? Swift defeats her own loneliness during plague times with music, color, light, dance. She too turned inward, but was able to hire a whole crew to outwardly express this inward turn. This imagining of them meeting would exist both inside and outside of COVID through the world of the music video. I can see Haley Steinfeld's Dickinson in the video's weird world. I can see her wandering not so much around the 2020 that the video was created within, though that part would be crucial in this imagined fourth season episode, but also in the conceit of the video itself. Following her own gold thread, wandering from world to world as she might imagine someone wandering page to page through her fascicles. She and Swift would find each other, take each other's hand. Would the two even speak? They would have to, before Dickinson would return home to Amherst, worried for the future, worried for her distant relative. Does Swift disclose they are related? She must. But not much else of this future would feel like a successor to Dickinson's own world in terms of a lived reality. Dickinson instead would find herself within the gold thread, within the fragments. Because of the strict COVID-19 protocols, she, of course, would not bring back the novel disease to the past. Don't worry, we've got the time travel worries covered. Willow takes me to Dickinson's poem beginning, "'Twas awkward, but it fitted me," an unbound poem on woven, cream, lightly rolled stationery according to an online description. I take a picture of the manuscript page in a library edition of Franklin's manuscript book, only to find it online hours later. The gold thread linking the poem and song is the poet and singer's steadfast hearts. Swift sings, "Wherever you stray, I follow," and Dickinson follows her heart outside of its established place, into death. Why do we do this in love? Bend to the whim of the other, move our ancient fashioned hearts from their predictable rising and falling into the depths of the afterlife. For what? To be omitted in the lease? To beg to have our plans wrecked? Ships not docked but swerving a sea. Nothing ever quite the open shut case our lawyer fathers want love to be for us, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. That was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So our final speaker is Yuhan. So whenever you're ready, Yuhan, take the floor.
Okay.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Okay, so let me quickly try my slide as well. All right. Where's it? Okay, so is it flipping?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, perfect. So first of all, I would like to thank Li-hsin and Kimberly for organizing this panel and preceded by so many brilliant papers. So I hope my presentation today will still make some contribution to our later discussion, hopefully. Okay. So, well, the primary goal of my paper today is to elucidate another way through which to probe their connections by arguing that the Dickinson-Swift conceptual correspondences are a promising route for future investigation. Since our time is limited, so I will focus primarily on my critical framework, and I will conclude with a brief textual comparison, and I hope we can continue the discussion during the workshop or Q&A section. So let's begin. Over the past few years, comparisons between Emily Dickinson and Taylor Swift have become increasingly prominent in both popular and scholarly discourse. There are some more concrete clues, either direct or indirect, helping us conjure up the connections between these two figures. So, for example, at the Nashville Songwriters Association International in 2022, Swift mentioned that some of her songs, quote, sound like a letter written by Emily Dickinson's great-grandmother, okay, and Swift announced the release of her 2020 album on Dickinson's birthday. This concurrence, together with the album's title, Evermore, has sparked some fan theories that it is somehow Dickinson-related. The most recent discovery of their genealogical relationships in 2024, moreover, bolsters the possibility of such Dickinson-Swift comparisons, and the possible Dickinson-Swift conceptual reverberations are presented as a promising lens. Even though all of these clues hint at some connections between Dickinson and Swift, whether the latter actually engages with the former remains elusive. However, I suggest that this very elusiveness opens rather than limits our exploration of their figurative affinities, as Susan Manning's comparative model persuasively demonstrates. Quote, conventional literary, historical, biographical, social, or textual evidence of connection is rapidly exhausted. End of quote. What matters is that, quote, probability of aesthetic and conceptual resemblances or reverberations, quote, controls our investment in comparison, end of quote. Building on this premise, my discussion sheds new light on the probable conceptual correspondences between Dickinson and Swift. It focuses on their reverberating deployment of ambiguous pronouns. This proposition raises several questions. What makes this reverberation between Dickinson's and Swift's uses of ambiguous pronouns possible? Is it merely a stylistic or textual resemblance? Or does it gesture towards some symbolic and metaphorical affinities, especially about how both writers imagine literary creation? A few interconnected similarities between them can help us anchor our vantage points in this discussion. All right. So, ambiguous pronouns pervade both poets' works. They both prefer to keep the reference of those pronouns metaphorical or symbolic rather than biographical. In one of her 1862 letters to T.W. Higginson, Dickinson famously remarked that, quote, when I state myself as the representative of the verse, it does not mean me, but a supposed person, end of quote. In one of her most recent interviews for the New York Times magazine's project on the 30 greatest living American songwriters, Swift expresses her disagreement with those who, while encountering her lyrics, conduct quote sort of a paternity test to do detective work, figure out the details, who is that about, assuming that, oh, this song is about that person. So this shared premise invites us to decipher the metaphorical meanings rendered in Dickinson's and Swift's deployment of ambiguous pronouns, and how such deployment constructs a shared approach to literary creation between them, I argue, is one of those. We can see that for both poets, the figurative realm, especially what they both categorize as a creative garden, is the place in which they find a particular sense of belonging. For Dickinson, what offers, quote, another sunshine despite the inevitable darkness, as she once wrote to Austen, is her creative garden. For Swift, to escape the unsatisfying reality, as her song I Hate It Here shows, is to run into, quote, the secret gardens in my mind. Literary ancestors occupy a significant role within each writer's figurative world as well. In the case of Dickinson, we know the importance of literary echoes and allusions in her writing through her correspondence with Higginson and Sue, for example. As for Swift, in the recent interview for the New York Times magazine mentioned earlier, she similarly discloses that her songs have, quote, been inspired by my life, by mythology, by fables, by books, and reflects how she revels in, quote, taking things that you've heard in books, films, these classic lines, and then repurposing them, inverting them, or like redefining them in some way in her lyrics. These contexts invite us to reread how Dickinson and Swift embed their relationships with literary ancestors in their writing, and such a rereading, I suggest, advance our understanding of the correspondences between them. What I outline as how both poets play with the ambiguous pronouns in their works, I further argue, elicits a layer of such embedding. So now, should be this page. Okay, so now I want to very quickly go through some examples, and we can leave some discussions for later. Both Dickinson and Swift foster an intimate relationship with their literary ancestors. If we interpret the deployment of "the" by Dickinson as emblematic of the poet's literary ancestors, her, the grave my little cottage is, appears to be a great example, encapsulating such an intimacy. Here, by categorizing the poem setting, the little cottage, as a grave, Dickinson subtly directs our attention to the poet speaker's relationship to the deceased one, her literary ancestors. Her later assignment of the speaker, the successor, to keep house for thee, the ancestor, reflects her acknowledgement of literary indebtedness to her predecessors. In this process, the speaker, moreover, incorporates the precursor work into her writing, as she put it in this way, for two divided briefly, till everlasting life unite. Rather than losing her creative identity, the speaker instead enriches herself through this inheritance process as they, quote, unite in strong society. A similar literary trope can be found in Swift's Ivy. Again, this song has been widely discussed already, featured in her 2020 album, Evermore. So like Dickinson, Swift seems to establish the I-you relationship as the speaker's relationship with the deceased one. Your touch brought forth an incandescent glow, tarnished but so grand. The palm of your freezing hand, for example. I propose that we similarly read this relationship as a literary ancestor-successor one. In this narrative, the level of great intimacy is manifested in how Swift categorizes this deceased, quote, putting roots in my dreamland, through which, quote, I am covered in you. Moreover, though maybe perhaps though more passive than Dickinson's successor in The Great My Little Cottage is, Swift's successor here is still not merely dependent on her ancestor, as the song portrays that this inheritance process is a war, the goddamn fight of my life, initiated by the ancestor's influence. So what I intend to further argue is that the ancestor-successor relationship in both Dickinson and Swift, reflected through their multiple approaches to their ambiguous pronouns, appears to be symbiotic rather than just linear. And one of my earlier articles already exemplifies the case of Dickinson in some of her master poems. And I think a similar trope can be found in, for example, Swift's Willow, also featured in her Evermore album. And then we can definitely talk about this more later. So I will pause here for now and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Henry. Wow, that was wonderful. I love that connection and the ancestors and the successors. That's a brilliant trope. That was amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to Helen now, my co-host, to sort of chair this roundtable discussion. So hope that's okay.
Yeah, it is okay. Can you hear me all right, everybody? Yeah, all good, great. Páraic, just keep me right. How long do we have for the kind of Q&A roundtable discussion?
So we have another 40 minutes. That's but yes, but I think we're going to also have the interactive writing workshop as well. Is that right, Li-hsin?
Yes, so yeah, we're hoping to combine the discussion with the sort of like
Perfect.
discussion lead
That's
to
great.
right?
Okay.
Yes.
That's perfect. First of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me, a non-Emily Dickinson scholar. I'm really, really pleased to be here. It's been such a good panel. I'm sure there will be lots and lots of questions and interesting discussions. I just wanted to briefly kind of to get us started and maybe thinking about connections between all of the fantastic papers. I was thinking about the themes of returning, rethinking, and reimagining that came up across them. I was thinking of, both across Swift and across Dickinson in terms of returning from the dead and hauntings, in terms of fans retailoring, reparative look at lyrics. I suppose in terms of both fans and scholars of Swift and Dickinson rereading and revising their original readings and interpretations of their work. I was thinking also about the theme of constant reinvention. Swift says herself, I haven't met the new me yet, and I think that's come up in different guises today. Recycling of old ideas, the tradwife content, those old ideals around gender and patriarchy maybe being recycled or repurposed and repackaged in a sort of era of social media and other contexts, re-engaging with nature or with hobbies during the pandemic, reweaving of lyrics into new contexts, as Kimberly beautifully did in her presentation. Kimberly, really enjoyed that. And then also the final thing I was thinking about was retellings, and of course retellings are not new, but I was thinking specifically because I've just recently watched Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, about maybe retellings having a bit of a resurgence in popular culture too. I'm thinking they're maybe having a moment. So those were kind of themes I could see connecting across all of the speakers. And I do have a few questions, but I feel I'll see if anybody wants to kick us off. Just to start with, we can either have a question for, the panel as a whole, or specific questions for panelists. I think we can take it from there. But I'll just check in case anybody wants to go first. Feel free to raise your virtual hand or physical hand, and I will keep an eye on that.
Well, thank you, Helen, so much for the really kind like summary of the panelists' works. Is so helpful here. And I would also like to sort of just draw attention to the fact that all our panelists have prepared one poem to pair with one song of some sort. So hopefully that kind of pairing could sort of offer some kind of conceptual kind of crutch for people to possibly generate their own responses. So we want to sort of like use this opportunity to help people think a little bit more about how we can possibly all turn ourselves into a Dickinsonian Swifty type of writer and thinker. Yeah.
Sure. So you want me to invite the panelists now to present to go through their pairings in a little bit more detail, or we can do some questions first?
Well, I think questions first will be
Perfect.
very helpful. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for inviting me. Okay, well, I'll follow up from my kind of overview then, which was kind of a reflective question for all of the panelists. When you were preparing your presentations for your papers for today, and when you were kind of engaging with these different projects and different kinds of research, did you have any, I suppose, was there a kind of revising process for you, or to kind of phrase it in another way? Did you come to this, your topic or your theme or your reading, with certain maybe ideas or preconceptions that you then challenged yourself, or how did your research change or your readings change throughout your work? I'd be happy for any of the panelists to respond to that if anyone would like to. So it's about the I suppose your process as well. Whoever would like to go first, and then I can see we have another question. Martha, we'll go to you after this one. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know who'd like to go first. Jeannette, go for it. Yeah.
Since I talked about this in my presentation, this project is a revision and a revisiting of the Ghosts of Emily Dickinson in Popular Culture exhibit that Elizabeth and I worked on in kind of 2020 through 2021. So it's really interesting just to see the kind of different approaches that we're taking. At least for me, a major difference as I'm revising and really kind of diving into this process is the emergence of the plant humanities as a kind of field that is defining itself. So I'm finding that exceedingly generative, but also kind of doing this work about kind of cottagecore to tradwife, kind of seeing the kind of state of our country and whatnot, and also the kind of further to your point about historical retellings, the ways in which there's going to be a new Little House on the Prairie adaptation on Netflix. So why now? What are their political motivations for that? They're cutting out some fascinating characters and doubling down on wild things. So I have a lot of reservations about the ways in which 19th century American women writers are being kind of wielded in support of kind of heteronormative family reification. So that's a long way of saying thank God for Emily Dickinson and the alternative that she provides to all of the nonsense that's being done in the service of our current administration.
Thank you, Jeannette. We'll hear from maybe any of the other panelists who would like to respond to that first of all. I see we have a couple of other hands raised. Thanks. I'll keep an eye on that so I can come back to people in the right order. But any of the other panelists like to respond to, your revision, your revising with your work and preparing for today?
So I could say something. I was while working on this, I had so many ideas, and then I had to sort of whittle them down, and they kind of had to do. And this is a theme that you also mentioned coming across. Coming back in many of the presentations about these endless reworkings and endless recontextualizations. So I also came across this idea of Taylor Swift, the song I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, being sort of put into a different context. There are all these TikTok videos by so-called corporate girlies, that's how they refer to themselves. In the song, Taylor Swift says, "I cry a lot, but I'm so productive." And this song is about her performing on stage with a broken heart, but she's doing it nonetheless. She's performing like an expert, and she doesn't let this heartbreak affect her performance. And these corporate girlies have sort of used it to comment on what this one writer from the Wall Street Journal calls hustle culture or neoliberal capitalist work culture. I cry a lot, but I'm so productive. So what work does to the individual, making you cry, but you're celebrated because you're so productive. So that was one thing. And then also I had this idea about this idea of tailoring, and how sort of Dickinson and Swift, they seem to sort of suggest that they are their poetry, in a sense. If you can say that Swift writes poetry, they are their poetry. Dickinson saying, of course, talking about the surgery that Thomas Wentworth Higginson did on her poetry, as the poems being in the gown, and then her being, when she can't control her force, leaving her bare and charred. So there's this idea of being clothed, not clothed. And then in the liner notes to the Tortured Poets department, Swift also talks about how her poetry, she comes out sort of scathed. They both come out from writing their poetry being scathed, rather than unscathed, they're scathed, but they're also sort of overwhelmed by their own power. So again, by their creative power, this idea of reveling in your creative power. So both of them sort of seem to have the idea of, also reveling in the joy of being a creator. And this is somehow linked to textiles, texture, this kind of thing. Cloth. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Saskia. So much to think about. Would any of the other panels like to respond to the revision with your work?
Maybe just a bit to throw in so the kind of collaborative or relationship or continuation of that lyrical voice. There's also this Dickinsonian take on the Wordsworthian poem, for example. There's like playful competitiveness there. So there is also a sense of a rivalry there. I thought it was quite interesting. And maybe that harkens back to what was being discussed earlier. Saskia also mentioned this idea of being playful, being like a bit of, a way of experimenting with all kind of voices. Maybe a bit of Harry Bloom's anxiety of influence there. But I thought that was also another way to think a little bit more about that poetic genealogy with the relationship there. Not for me, because I'm not a poet, unfortunately. Not a songwriter either. So there's I only have admiration for them. But
Thank you, Lindsay. We can maybe pick up some of the audience, but Martha, I think you were next, and then we'll go to Cole and see where it takes us. Thank you, Martha.
Okay. And I'll keep my comments short. I've talked a lot, but this conference is about connections. We've repeated that over and over. And certainly the connection between, it's come up several times. Can we call Taylor Swift a poet? Yes, we can. And people can argue with me about that if they want to, but I'm right and you're wrong. But the connections across time, across culture, and connections to audience. Have I missed it, or have we talked about the ways that thinking about Dickinson infusing and connecting to popular culture, not just her popular culture, but popular culture in the decades since then and now, helps reach audiences? Did that question make any sense? Because I do think that, I have students coming to my classes. Elizabeth and Jenny know this, and they say, well, I'm taking this course because of Taylor Swift. And I said, huh? And they said, well, you know, y'all. And I said, no, it's Jenny and Elizabeth. And if y'all haven't seen that exhibition, you should. Exhibition on Taylor Swift. And then they say, but it got me interested in Dickinson's poetry. They don't think it's a course about Taylor Swift, and it's not. So, can y'all help me think about this a little bit more, like how generative this is and how recognizing that is very important?
Thanks, Martha. Who would like to respond
Sure.
to that? Anyone would like to respond to, I mean,
So
awesome. That's great for me to hear. Sorry to interrupt, Kimberly, that I mean, I suppose it's like Taylor Swift as a gateway, for want of a better word, into maybe literature that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise have engaged in. Yeah. Kimberly, yeah, thank you.
Well, I was gonna say it depends on what type of course it is, right? Obviously. So like a Swift, or I'm sorry, a class on Dickinson, I think I would have a different answer. But just thinking more generally about teaching, I think pop culture is often like one of the best ways to get your students to the thing you want to get them to just kind of show them like the parallels between like what people are doing in pop culture and what is happening like in Dickinson on the page, even though she wasn't pop culture during her time. That doesn't mean that there can't be just general parallels. Like I'm always trying to keep up with pop culture so I can give my students a gateway into the thing. I think teaching a songwriting or a poetry class, I'm going to have a different answer for you because there's more obvious sort of overlap there. Like you can look at lyrics on the page kind of like a poem, and a lot of times creative writers will come into a classroom with like lyrics as kind of their first poetry that they love before they love poetry on the page. So I think that's a really generative leap, is thinking about specifically with close reading. I find if the first time you hear a song, you don't hear every word, right?
No.
You grab onto like one lyric, and that's what makes you hit play again, right? Or whatever we do these days. Backspace our song. Do it digitally. And I always tell my students like that's the same as reading a poem. You're not going to get it all the first time. Like the first time you hear a song, like you don't get the whole song unless it's like, Old MacDonald Had a Farm. But yeah, so just like thinking about like if they can close read a song, then they can close read a poem.
To kind of add on to what Kimberly is saying, this is something that I took out of my presentation because I didn't have enough time, but one of the things that I do early on when I teach a literature class is that the first assignment is a lyric annotation assignment. So students get to choose a song that they like, they print it out, and they have to mark it up. They have to like have this physical interaction with it. And they also have to write, a short analysis explaining their annotation, which can, and the annotations can include highlights, drawings, all of these things, and I actually use my own annotation of Ivy by Taylor Swift as an example, which is funny. And I find that it makes students feel much more confident in their own ability to like do interpretive work, because poetry can feel really scary to them or inaccessible, and they realize through this like work of interacting with the music that they love that they actually can feel empowered and do the interpretive work for the rest of the class. So I think like on a practical level, pop culture, music, and lyrics are really great starting points for getting students interested in textual analysis and reading.
And helping them recognize they already have some expertise that they're just not aware of.
And I can also add something to it, because I think the case in Taiwan is even more interesting, because like for students here, like English literature or like Dickinson's poem, for example, is considered like very, very exotic and like foreign literature, kind of like that. So sometimes when I'm teaching students, like their first thought is, okay, I'm going to learn English first. And then what pop up in their head is learning English through pop English songs. And right now, Taylor Swift is always like the figure that immediately come up in their head. So what I would do sometimes is using some of her Swift songs. And then at first, the initiative is to teach them English, but at the same time, try to put some Dickinson's poems beside and let them know, oh my God, yes, there is a poet there, and actually not as difficult, not as distant as you expected at first. So should we also join her creative garden? So that's how I try to introduce to a lot of different levels of students here in Taiwan. Yeah.
Thank you.
I could also, oh, sorry.
Go for it. Yep.
I could also briefly add something in the Netherlands recently in literature departments. There's been quite a lot of discomfort with reading canonical authors, as white canonical authors, and Dickinson, you could say, is one of them in a way. She's gotten so much attention, and then you can also, there was this relatively recent publication about reading Dickinson's Black contexts, and in this anthology called Decentering Dickinson. So there's a sort of a discomfort with Dickinson, with that canonical status, or her as a white author, as a possibly conservative author, all this kind of thing. But then you have the Dickinson show and this fan engagement with the LGBT content that people associate with Dickinson, and that provides a way of putting her in an entirely different context and reading her and sort of allowing students to have sort of 21st century conversations about LGBT writers being overlooked and this sort of thing. So the pop culture that was being mentioned, sort of the link allows these different readings and students, I think, to have different kinds of conversations as well.
Yeah, it opens rather than closes.
Yeah, opens and the possibility for recontextualization too, which I think, few people have said. I'm just mindful we want to have enough time for the workshop part to show the kind of lyrics and the poems, but Cole has been waiting patiently. Thank you, Cole. So I'll go over to you and then Nicole. Thanks, Cole.
Oh yeah, no problem. And if we've got to move swiftly, no pun intended, then that's fine. I'm just thinking in Saskia, what you were saying, I think is a logical transition into what I've been considering. I'll say I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of Taylor Swift, and I don't say that to be a contrarian, only to suggest that I don't know anything really. But my perception of it, several of you were talking about Swift's folklore and Evermore records, and what I know in a cursory sense is those are the records that a lot of people think are her best, and they also have this like perceived implied privacy to them because of the cottagecore thing, and a handful of other reasons. And when I think of Dickinson too, like the casual perception of her is often interest rooted in something that is patently untrue about her. There are a lot of folks who are really interested in Dickinson because of like a lifelong reclusivity that wasn't necessarily true, or like because they think she wrote in her own blood or something like that. And we like ascribe these values that we want to be true about these folks to them in order for them to meet an expectation. And what you were talking about, Jeannette, in your talk was that there's this sort of like there's been this transition in Swift's corpus away from that image of herself. And so my understanding on a cursory level, just like knowing folks who really like Taylor Swift, is that they tend to agree with you that Life of a Showgirl has done something that seems sort of like indelible to that previous perception of her. And so I wonder if y'all could talk on any level about that, the way that we appreciate and we like an artist maybe more for the image that we're imposing on them than we do for the art, and whether that feels applicable to Swift in similar ways to Dickinson.
Any of the panelists or anyone, feel free to unmute yourself and you respond. Go for it.
Yeah, cool. I think that's a great question. And I really think what you pointed out with like the way that fans are reacting to Life of a Showgirl is really interesting. And not to throw my co-panelist under the bus, but Elizabeth does a great job talking about Reputation. And I remember when Reputation came out and people were so mad, like the newspaper clippings, people were like, I hate Taylor Swift. I'm never, da, 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 da. People were so angry. And so what I think is so interesting about Swift, she kind of came onto like the popular culture, like dominant media landscape so young and has had such a long career that we're able to, as she self-referentially knows, track her eras. So I think the kind of sine curve of the popular response to her eras is really interesting. And I think just like Reputation, we're at a moment where we're kind of like, what you doing, lady? But her career is going to be so long, I think. So I'm interested to see what will be the moment that we universally and critically acclaim comes back to Swift. With Dickinson, I think it's so interesting because she did have a tighter control over her image just by virtue of not publishing. And now I'm just going to start quoting from Elizabeth's paper, so I might as well turn off my mic and let other people, probably Elizabeth, talk.
Maybe just a quick comment on that as well. I'm thinking about how across the process of my research, always people will come and ask like, oh, what do you think of that Dickinson poem? Not all of her poems are great, right? Just some are very sophisticated and some seem to be so oddly otherworldly and so on and so forth. So I feel like maybe that's a question that will always pop up once for a while. So the idea of reputation, I think Dickinson make it very clear. Fame is a fickle thing of some sort. And yeah, and I also think about Virginia Jackson reading of Dickinson. When do you start to think of her words as poems? To what extent can you start to see that process of reading her as a way to encounter, a lyrical voice or so on? I feel like that's such a complicated a question, but definitely helps us reflect upon the process of lyricization and possibly canonization, right? Who deserves to be read and who has the say in this publication business there.
Yeah, you were thinking of fame as a fickle food upon a shifting plate.
Oh, thank you, Martha.
Well, it's
That's really
hilarious. I think it's so funny. And it's true. And can I
absolutely.
pop in one? Oh, never mind, Nicole. I'll be quiet. I had one more
Okay.
question.
Yeah, let's go to Nicole if
Oh,
that's okay, and then we can
yeah.
go on just so we have a bit of time for the workshop if that's okay. So Nicole, thank you.
Oh yeah, no,
Sorry, Martha, to
no,
jump in there.
no, Martha, no, it's fine. I only want to just say a few quick words. First of all, I apologize for joining the session late, and I really enjoyed the presenters that I had the pleasure to hear. And it's encouraged me to consider two things. The first is vocality and breath, and the second is storytelling. And I say that because I came to Dickinson quite a while ago from music, not reading her poetry. I came to her work through song. So where my first experience of Dickinson was lyrical setting of her writing. And in that sense, I viewed her writing as lyrics from the very beginning. So I think what's very interesting is, this notion of close reading. And I think it's important for us to consider how do we first encounter the artist? And I say the artist in the broader word. So for me, reading Dickinson, closer reading of Dickinson has not necessarily pulled me away from considering her a lyric writer, actually, but becoming more clear about the vocality in her writing when it may not be immediately obvious, and that includes breath, spaces where spaces, places within her writing. Similarly, when we look at Swift's writing and we're looking at, you know, the way that she uses space and place and vocality within the songwriting process, I think the interesting invitation for us is to view Swift as a poet away from musical construction and the presentation of celebrity, and to view Dickinson as a songwriter of sorts. So there's just a few ideas that I wanted to put forward. And of course, I know that some of you have mentioned, you know, Dylan, Sondheim, and you know, so this is not a new phenomenon, yes? But I think it's something, it's an interesting continuum that's been raised here between Dickinson and Swift, aside from, you know, sort of genealogy. I think it's an interesting idea about voice and breath and construction and storytelling. So, yeah.
Nicole, your comments are making me think about, and thank you, by the way.
Oh, no, thank you. I don't know, this is really random.
Over the years, but they're making me think of, and this is true with Swift too, unless Swifties tell me otherwise, there's this possessiveness people have about this is the right way to read Emily Dickinson. This is the right way to listen to Taylor Swift. Aren't they like that? I shouldn't say that. I listen a lot to Taylor Swift. What is that possessiveness about? You're an artist.
Well, I think it's a safe place in which to function and to be in relationship with the material. So I also think it comes with perhaps training and education and a particular sort of vernacular in which you function and you work and yes, I mean, I don't know. I think it would be very interesting. For example, I have a book on my bookshelf which is Bob Dylan's lyrics, but as a poetry collection. How interesting would it be? It might have already happened. It's not that I'm a non-Swiftie, but I'm not an active Swiftie. I mean, I find her fascinating to a point, but wouldn't it be interesting to see a publication of her lyrics and for people to be invited to experience her work without, you know, the sort of the songwriting sort of construction or the foundation underneath, and also, of course, the visual impact, which is so profound, really, more and more in terms of popular culture and celebrity culture. So,
yeah,
I don't know whether that's answered your question.
You ruminating on it is very instructive for me and very, but I've been making jokes with people about, we were in New York for Taylor and Travis's wedding. And, people were like, traffic. It wasn't bad at all. And we were in Madison Square Garden getting our train when their guests were arriving for the wedding. But I was surprised at how everybody in New York, from people at the Broadway theaters to people in our hotel, are you here for the wedding? No one said whose wedding. Everyone knew whose wedding. The taxi drivers often said that. And, that kind of Taylor Swift becoming a lingua franca, that's also true of Dickinson. And I don't know. I was very struck with how possessive some Swifties were. I was like, I think she's strong. She can take whatever is dished out. And I think that about Dickinson too. When people get very possessive and say, no, that's wrong. I'm like, come on, she's strong.
Can I also add some thoughts? So thanks, Nicole, for that question. And Martha Nels, like your point. I think what fascinates me a lot, and then why we could have this kind of discussion about these two poets, I think is because of their fluidity. So that's why there's no such a set boundaries between their writing. So that's why we can compare them together. And then what would be so interesting is to see what if today someone composed one of Dickinson's fascicles and then make that into an album? What about we put one of Swift's album into a fascicle format and then read that in a fascicle context? And I think both poets, based on my understanding or my perception of them, will be very happy with that because they both open to possibilities and interpretation. And I think one thing, if I do remember correctly, in one of the interviews, Swift did mention that lyrics writing is very, very important for her. Words carry a lot of weight to her, and sometimes she likes to put some secrets in her lyrics and wait for her fans to discover. Maybe this word, why italicize, capitalize, kind of like that. So I think this kind of no boundary fluidity just opened up loads of discussion and interpretation, yeah, for them. Yeah.
Well, and isn't she also, you're likely to know, or Jenny or Elizabeth or someone else in the panel, Li-hsin, isn't Swift an avid reader? Am I making that up?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
especially her most recent interview is about like her songwriting process. She talked a lot about how she got inspired by those books and materials and how she likes to really play with those inspirations, kind of like Dickinson, like recycler, right? So I think that's so fascinating to see that.
But I will say she does not have a celebrity book club like Dua Lipa. Dua Lipa's book club is actually quite good, and she's reading like Booker Prize winners. So I wonder,
Really?
oh yeah, I wonder when or if Taylor Swift will like go into the celebrity book club area. But I don't think she will. I think she's too famous.
See why my students, I mean, well, y'all aren't students anymore. You're your own quick women, but y'all taught me so much. You have. Who was it said, wasn't it our friend Walt? First thing you do is kill the teacher? Or was that Shakespeare?
Could have been either of them potentially, actually. Yeah.
But I learned so much, you know?
I think it was Confucius.
There you go.
Sure.
Maybe it was God.
Everyone, I'm a bit mindful. We're nearly at the end of our session, and we haven't, I think, unless I've got the time difference incorrect on my end. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance for anybody to share their pairings yet, but I feel the discussion's been really, people have been so engaged and picking up on things. Páraic, how should we proceed? Because we've got a couple of minutes left.
So I
Yeah.
have the creative writing exercise on a slide that I'd like
Sure.
to share.
Perfect.
So I just put it in the chat.
That would be
So
great. Thank
rather
you.
than us talking about our pairing, since we already talked so
Yeah.
much, and then I'm sharing my screen too.
Sure. So we can use this as a prompt then, Kimberly, to, yeah.
Just to say that the next panel doesn't start until 12:30 or 12:30 in Eastern time.
Yeah,
So
I'm
there
gonna
there's more
I'm
time.
gonna explain this though because I'm, as I said, as another conference and I have to go. So if you don't mind.
Okay. Sure.
But yeah, so this was kind of our idea for just making this into something fruitful and creative, and certainly you could use this in a lot of different ways. So just picking any Dickinson poem and any Taylor Swift song. It works best if you know both very well, but you could only know one very well. I think that that would work out fine. You'd have to just close read the other one and really inspect it. And then kind of just looking for places where the poem and the song could meet. So comparing and contrasting. I think this is most generative if you look at the words more than anything else. So this first suggestion, where they are on the page, where they are, between the lines, like not just the words they're using to say, but also what they're trying to say or what you think they're trying to say. Then also looking at where each is in biography. So many of us talked about the different eras of Taylor Swift. So thinking about like where she is in her career, thinking about where Dickinson was in her career in the estimated time that she wrote the poem. And then also just in general history, time or like era, again, to use that word. So the just stark differences between the 19th century and the 21st century. So just doing this good thinking, looking at those two, and then making it into a generative exercise. So we had a little bit of discussion over in the um chat about genre. So choose a genre or don't. So one of the things as a creative writer that we often encourage people to do is just write, just let your mind do the thing. Like, you don't have to write a poem or write a song, just kind of see what happens and then figure out, okay, where is this going to fit in society's understanding of genre? But yeah, you could start in song and end up in prose. You could start in prose and end up in song. So just a bunch of different ways that one could consider um, just drawing these connections and seeing what happens.
Brilliant. So will we leave it at that? Will we kind of wrap up the panel? What do people want to do?
Well, I was going to suggest that we do have a Discord, and if you are an Emily Dickinson International Society member, you should have access to that Discord. And if you don't, we can get you access. So if we didn't have enough time, people could share what they come up with in the general chat in the Discord. I have to go, but you
Okay.
all can stay here and keep having wonderful conversation about these two wonderful poets. But yeah, thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Kimberly.
I put a
Thank you.
screenshot of the generative exercise in the chat so y'all can download it, okay? Thank you so
Thank you,
much. Sorry
Kimberly.
that I have
Thank
to
you.
leave so quickly.
No
Bye.
problem. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe to give people like we've been on Zoom for a while, maybe we'll stop if that's okay. That's okay with everybody. And then we're coming back down at 12:30 Eastern time.